The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Once upon a time there were 25 tin soldiers, and they all looked like brothers, for they had been made in the same old tin spoon. Their uniforms were splendid in red and blue. They carried muskets in their arms, and they held themselves very upright, and even in their narrow box they lay straight, one next to the other, and waited. The first word they heard in this world, when the lid was taken off their box, was "Tin soldiers!" And so they knew exactly who they were. It was a little boy who said this, clapping his hands at the same time. They had been given these 25 tin soldiers because it was his birthday, and now he took them from their box and set them out on the table. The soldiers resembled each other to the hair. Only one was rather different from the rest. He had but one leg. You see, he had been made last when there was not enough tin left. However, he stood just as firmly on his one leg as the others did upon their two. And it is this one-legged tin soldier whose fortunes seem to us worthy to be recorded. The little boy had set out his tin soldiers on the table. On it there were several other playthings, but the most charming of them all was a little pasteboard castle. In front of the castle there stood some tiny trees, clustering around a little mirror intended to represent a lake, and waxen swans swam on the lake and were reflecting on the surface. This was lovely. Through the open windows one could look into the rooms, and if you bent very low and got near the windows, your breath made the casements move and the little trees rustle. The prettiest thing of all was a little damsel standing in the open doorway of the castle. She, too, was cut out of pasteboard, and she wore a green frock of the clearest muslin, with a sparkling rose and a ribbon which flung across her shoulders like a scarf. She stretched out both arms and raised one of her legs. You see, she was a dancer, so high in the air that the tin soldier could not see it, and thought that she, like him, only had one leg. That would be just the wife for me, he thought. But she is probably of rather too high rank, for she lives in a castle and I only live in a box which I have to share with my 24 brothers. That is not the right place for her, but I would like to get acquainted with her. And so he stationed himself behind the snuff box that stood on the table. From this place he had a full view of the delicate little lady, and he would keep watching her without himself being seen. She still remained standing on one leg, without losing her balance. When evening came and the little boy had to go to bed, all the other 10 soldiers were put away in the box. Only the one, the 25th, remained lying behind his box. When the people in the house had gone to bed, toys in their turn began to play. They pretended to visit, to fight battles, to give balls, and they made a great noise. The 10 soldiers rattled in their box, for they wanted to play too, but the lid would not come off. The nutcracker cut capers, the slate pencil screeched across the slate. There was such a noise that the canary woke up and began to talk too, but he always talked in verse. The only two who did not move from their places were the tin soldier and the little dancer. She constantly remained in her graceful position, standing at the point of her foot, her arms outstretched, and he stood just as firmly on his one leg, never for one moment turning his eyes away from her. 12 o'clock struck. Crash! The lid of the snuff box sprang open, but there was no snuff inside. Out jumped a little black jack in the box. "Tin soldier!" he shouted. "Keep your eyes off what does not concern you!" But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "Well, you wait till tomorrow," said the jack, and jumped about with glee, as though he were looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning, when the little boy had got up, he took the tin soldier and placed him on the window ledge, and nobody will ever know whether it was a draught or a little jack in the box, but the window flew open, and out fell the tin soldier, head foremost from the third story to the ground. A dreadful fall it was. His one leg turned over and over in the air, and at last he came to rest poised on a soldier's cap, with a bayonet between the paving stones. A maidservant and the little boy immediately came down to look for him, but although they were very near to trod on him, they could not see him. If only he had been able to call out, "Here I am!" they might have easily found him. But he thought it would not be seemly for him to shout, because he was in uniform. And now it began to rain. Every drop fell heavier than the last. It was a real downpour. The boy and the maidservant ran back into the house. The tin soldier remained lying in the street. When the rain was over, two urchins came by. "Look," said one, "there's a tin soldier. We should put him in a ship and let him sail away." So they made a boat out of an old newspaper and placed a tin soldier into it, and away he sailed down the gutter, both boys running along by the side, clapping their hands. The paper boat rocked to and fro, and every now and then veered round so quickly that the tin soldier became quite giddy. And the waves there were, and the current. That was on account of the heavy rain. The tin soldier was afraid, but he did not move a muscle. He looked straight before him and held his bayonet tightly clasped. All at once the boat sailed under a long gutter board, and it was dark here as home in his own box. "I wonder where I am going," thought the little tin soldier. "To be sure, this is all the little Jack-in-the-box is doing. Yet if the little maiden were sailing here with me, I would not mind, even if it were twice as dark." Just then a big water rat that lived under the long gutter board darted out. "Have you got a passport?" replied the rat. "Then show it to me immediately." But the tin soldier was silent and held his weapon with a still firmer grasp. You see, he did not have a passport. The boat sailed on and the rat followed. He furiously showed his teeth and showed out the sticks and straws in the gutter. "Stop him! Stop him! He has not paid the toll! He has not shown his passport!" But the current grew stronger and stronger, and the little ship broke in the sticks and straws that had helped to halt it, and the tin soldier could already catch a glimpse of the bright daylight where the gutter board came to an end. But at the same time he heard a roaring noise at which the boldest heart might well have trembled, for where the tunnel ended, the water of the gutter fell steeply into a big canal. This was as dangerous for the tin soldier as it would have been for us were we to sail down a mighty waterfall. He was now so close that he could not stop. The boat darted forward, and the poor tin soldier held himself as stiff and immovable as possible. No one should accuse him of ever having blinked an eyelid. Twice the boat spun around and round, and it was filled with water to the brim, and it began to sink. Soon the tin soldier stood in the water up to his neck. The paper dissolved, and the water closed over his head. He thought of the pretty little dancer whom he would never see again, and these words rang out in his ear. "Wild adventure, mortal danger, be your fate, O valiant stranger." And with that the paper came completely asunder. The tin soldier fell into the foaming vortex, and immediately he was swallowed up by a large flesh-eating fish. It was terribly dark in there, worse than even the gutter board, and narrower than the box with the 24 other tin soldiers. But the tin soldier's resolution was as constant as ever. There he lay at full length, shouldering his arms. The fish turned and twisted about and made the strangest movements. At last he became quite still. It was as though a flash of lightning had darted through him. Suddenly daylight shone through brightly, and a voice called out, "The tin soldier!" The fish had been caught and taken to market, where the maidservants had brought him and taken him home. In the kitchen they had cut up the belly with a large knife, and there was a tin soldier, straight as a dart, and looking like a much-travelled man. "This is amazing," said the maidservant. She seized the tin soldier by the middle of her 2 fingers and carried him out to the parlor, where everyone was eager to see the man who had travelled in the maw of a fish. They put him on the table, and there, how could anything so extraordinary happen in the world? The tin soldier was in the same room in which he had been before. There were the same children, the same toys stood on the table. There was the beautiful castle with the pretty little dancing maiden who was still standing on one leg, while she held the other quite high up in the air. It quite affected the tin soldier. He could have wept 10 tears, but such weakness would have been unbecoming in a soldier. He looked at her, and she looked at him, but neither spoke a word. Just at that moment, the little boy took the tin soldier and threw him into the stove, without reason or rhyme. That is what little boys are like. But perhaps it was the fault of the wicked little Jack-in-the-Box. The tin soldier now stood in a blaze of red light. The heat, of course, was dreadful. Whether the heat was the result of the actual fire or the flames of love within him, he did not know. He had entirely lost his lovely colors. Nobody can say whether this change had happened during his travels, or was the effect of strong emotion. He looked upon the little lady, and she looked upon him. He felt that he was melting, but constant as ever, he stood still, shouldering his arms. Suddenly a door was opened, and a draught seized the dancer. Like a swift she flew straight into the stove to the tin soldier, flared up into a blaze, and was gone. Now the tin soldier had lost his wish to live. He melted into a hard lump. Next morning, when the maidservant took the ashes out of the grate, she found therein a little tin heart. That was all that remained of him. Of the pretty dancer, however, all that remained was a tiny sparkling rose that had adorned her shoulder, and that was burnt to a cinder.